Okay, welcome everybody to Parsha Insights for our double Parsha of Behar Bechukotai. As we're going to take a look, and what we're going to say today is going to be for those who have been, with us for a number of months and studying the Torah of Rabbi Moshe Shapiro. It's going to be somewhat familiar. Some of it's going to be super fresh from last week, and some of it is going to echo ideas that we've discussed in the past, but always in a very new and interesting way. I found worthy of teaching anew. So let's jump right in. So here we go. We're going to start not with this week's parsha, but with last week's parsha. Last week's parsha, as we spoke about the mitzvah of the Omer, I believe that's what we did recently. So Svartem Lachem, so the mitzvah of the Omer in the 23rd chapter of Leviticus, which is Parsha and more. You shall, that was last week's parsha, you shall count on the day you bring that the sheaf of elevation offering, the day after the Sabbath, and we spoke about how that concept, the day after the Sabbath, is interpreted in different ways by different traditions. You count off 7 weeks, they have to be complete. You must count until the day after the 7th week, 50 days, and then you shall bring an offering of new grain to God. Okay, fantastic. So I have the concept. I'm very familiar with this concept now. We've talked about it extensively. So we count days between Passover and Shavuot. We count not one, not two, but 49 days. And on day number 50, we get to Shavuot. Beautiful, done. And now we're ready to turn the page. And we're ready to move on because that was last week. Let's leave that behind us. Yeah, I get we're counting the Omer, but let's, we're in the middle of the period of counting Omer. Last night we counted the 35th day, but let's move on. Let's give me a different topic. Give me a different subject, please. I was at last week's Parsha class. Give me something new this week. No, sorry. Too bad. Because Parshat Behar gives us the same thing. Different units, but the same idea. 49 and 50. Those are going to be the magical numbers. V'safarta lacha, as it says in this week's Parsha, you shall count, right? You see, I put this side by side. It's not side by side in the Torah. Usfartem lachem, v'safarta lacha, you shall count, Sheva Shabtot Shanim Sheva Pa'amim. You shall count 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7 years, 49 years. A period of 7 weeks of years gives you a total of 49 years. The Torah is saving us from doing math and is telling us how much 7 times 7 is. And then you shall sound the horn loud in the 7th month, the 10th day of the month, the day of atonement. Right in the Torah, the months are measured in Torah time. The months are measured from Nisan. Nisan is month number 1, and Tishrei is month number 7. So here we are in the 7th month, and the 10th day, the day of atonement. You shall have the horn sounded throughout your land. You shall hallow the 50th year. Now is the 50th year. You shall proclaim release throughout the land to all of its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Jubilee is the Hebrew word Yovel. It's a literal translation, right? For those linguistics amongst us, this is when transliteration goes awry and gives birth to different pronunciations. This is how Yerushalayim becomes Jerusalem, because the J in German is really what we say in English as a Y. And so what originally to a German transliterator would have been, this word would have been Jubilee. So Yovel would be connected to the Yovel. So suddenly we get a J stuck in there. And that's just our English mispronunciation of the letter J, and hence Jerusalem, hence Jericho, hence Judah, and hence so many other things in Judaism. In fact, the very name of our religion, Yahadut, is based on a German J, which is called the letter Yot. J-O-D is Yot, and that's why it becomes a J in English, all because of the way we don't say things the way the German letters are meant to be pronounced. So we have the Jubilee, the Yovel, okay? So parallel commandments. 49 days to Shavuot, 49 years to the Jubilee. Okay, you see, this is a classic. We are setting up a comparison and trying to ask ourselves, what are they teaching us? What is 49? What is 50? What is happening here? And just the Zohar has a very famous comment on the Jubilee, how everything, Hashem Neshiva Derucha Lakula, God restores everyone's spirit. There's something very sacred that's happening in the Jubilee. V'chola taivun la'trayu, everything returns to its original place. That's the concept of the Jubilee. Everything returning to its original place. Right? All of the lambs go back to original owners. All of the slaves are freed. All the loans are forgiven, and so on. Like Shavuot, the only means to reach the Jubilee, the 50th year, and to join ourselves to it was by counting the previous 49 years. And to make the comparison further, you know the blessing we say? And we say this every night as we're counting the Omer. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haomer v'tzivanu al sfiras haomer. God has counted us to count the Omer. And then we say, today is 35 days, which are 5 weeks of the Omer. That's what we said last night. Okay, that's our formula. And the Chavetz Chaim in the commentary on the Midrash says that when it came to the Jubilee, also, that they would get together, the Beit Din would count, the Beit Din HaGadol, the Sanhedrin, would count the year, B'tchilat HaShanah, the beginning of the year, B'hayim U'varchim, they would say the bracha, Al Sfirat HaYovel. I did not know that before preparing this class, that there was a blessing, that every year they would say, Baruch Hashem Al Sfirat HaYovel. And just like for the Omer, we say today is the 35th day, or the day before was the 34th day, which was 4 weeks and 6 days for the Omer. So too, they say after the blessing, Hayom Nichnasa Shana Achat, today is 1 year. Hayom Shabbat Shanim, today is 7 years Shem Shemita Achat, which is one sabbatical cycle, one Shemitah cycle. V'chein, and also they would say, meaning giving examples of how they would count, Hayom Teshav Arba'im Shana, today is 49 years, Shem Shabbat Shemitot, which are 7 sabbatical cycles. Hakol Kamo Shemonim L'Sfirat HaOmer, exactly as they would count for the Omer. This is not just the same number, 49 and 50. These are parallel, deeply parallel commandments. And the Ramban and other commentators note the similarity between these commandments and state that the concepts are parallel. The day of the giving of the Torah is a semblance of the Jubilee year. Okay? So, we are now going to jump into a little bit, and again, today I think we're going to achieve this in good time. And we're going to jump into an area of trying to understand what this path of 49 to 50 actually is. So we're going back to a source that we've seen before. I'm not going to test you, and I won't ask you how many remember this source, but just nod at me if you do. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. This is the Mishnah of Tractate Uksin, the final of the Mishnah, the final of the tractates of the Talmud. And Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says, Atid HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God in the future, God will give 310 worlds to every righteous person, right? Sound familiar? Remember we talked about the number 310, and we talked about the numerical value of 310, and it was quite extraordinary. In fact, one of the meanings of 310, David, thank you, one of the meanings of 310, there's the numerical value of the Hebrew word Omer. We're not going to talk about that today, but that's one thing that Ayin Memresh, that's one thing that we spoke about another time so much. Why? Because the proof text is from Proverbs, Lahanchil Ohavai, to inherit, cause to inherit my beloved ones, Yesh. And the Hebrew word Yesh, we didn't quite know what it meant. Va'otzroteim amalei, and I will fill their storehouses. So what do we say the word Yesh? So Moshe Shapiro had so much to say about the word Yesh. Does anyone remember? We said the Yud means one thing and the Shin means another thing, or we interpret it as a sin. And I say that specifically with my hands. The Yud means one thing and the Shin or the Sin means another thing. The Yud meant Yamin, which means right. The Sin meant small, which means left. And we spoke about the different sides and the symbolism of the different sides of the Kisei HaKavod, of God's heavenly throne. We're not going to do that today, but Yesh is what God wants us to have at the end, and Yesh is the numerical value of 310. So that's why it says that each person inherits 310 worlds, because Yesh is so yesh, that Hebrew word, it means to have, but it means it's what God is going to allow us to inherit. But we're going to see a different side of yesh. Because look at the Zohar. Amar Rabbi Shimon. You know who Rabbi Shimon is? Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who we celebrate on Lag BaOmer. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who's part of that second generation of students of Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, L'hanchil yesh, to allow my beloved ones to have this yesh. My yesh. What does yesh mean? Daraza, de Yovel, ushmita. It's the Jubilee and it's the sabbatical. Yovel with the Yud and Shmita with the Shin. Jubilee being the 50, Shmita being the 7 times 7 being the 49. That's a new interpretation of the word Yesh. Last time it was Yamin and small, right and left. This time the Yud stands for Jubilee, Yovel, and the Shin stands for Shmita, which is the sabbatical years. Delo, and then it goes on and it says, this is not relevant to us, but just to read the end of the Zohar, Lo Masar, Yaton Kadosh Baruch Hu l'shar amin, God did not give these commandments to other nations, El Amakadisha, but rather to the holy nation, to the Jewish people, B'shata Yisrael, Natrin Shata Shmita Kedekayos, and in the time when Israel is observing the years of the sabbatical years as is appropriate, as it should be, Nishmotem Tzadikai Mishtashim B'Gintal Edom, that the souls of the holy ones are able to enjoy, are able to play in the Garden of Eden, are able to have pleasure in the Garden of Eden. Okay, so and we talk separately about this. Okay, anyway, we'll leave it at that. So previously we defined yesh as existence. According to the Zohar, teaches the mystery of existence is the Jubilee and the sabbaticals, Yovel, Shmita. This concept requires clarification. I'm going to pause for a moment. Are there any questions, comments, complaints?
I will have a fun comment because I remember Yesh is Yamina, Smola, Smola. I don't know if you danced to that, but
yeah. Lifami Mahora. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. So I want you to keep these letters in mind because we're going to come back to them shortly. The Yud and the Shin, because even in the letters there is meaning, as Rav Moshe Shapiro is going to show us what these letters symbolize, not the numerical values, but the function of the letters in the Hebrew language.
Well, okay. but when you're saying yesh as existence, are you talking about philosophically yesh meaning we are here? Is that what he's referring to? Previously we defined yesh as existence.
That was similar to the original interpretation of yesh, which is that God gives us existence. God gives us a sanctified and exalted existence. And now we have the Zohar, which says, well, what is this existence? This existence is the Jubilee and the sabbatical years. What are we talking about? The 49 and the 50, of what relevance is this to my existence? I don't even know what year we are in the Jubilee cycle. I don't know what year we are in the sabbatical. I do kind of know what year we are in the sabbatical cycle, but it's not a really important part of my life. So what's really happening here? So let's keep going. Creation. Finally, we're on familiar territory. No more of this Jubilee and sabbatical business. Let's go to creation. Hisheshet Yamim from the 10 Commandments in 6 days. 6 days. Hisheshet Yamim Hashem et Hashemayim et Haaretz. God made heaven and earth. So the Zohar says something really interesting. The Zohar says Shiva Yomim Ilaim, that God created 7 exalted days. God created the world 7 exalted days. Va'alayhu shatil uvane almi. And God planted and built worlds on the basis of those days. Hadahu dichtiv ki sheshet yamim asa Hashem velo kativ bisheshet. So the nuance that the Zohar is pointing out has to do with those words. That God created the world. See, the English is a little bit misleading. Because how would I say, forget the Hebrew for a moment, how would you say for in 6 days? For in 6 days. You would say ki be sheshet yamim. There's a prefix. There's a prefix that's required, the letter bet. Ki be sheshet yamim. In the course of 6 days, God created the heaven and earth. But the Torah doesn't say that. The Torah says ki sheshet yamim asad. It's almost as if God is creating the days alongside the heavens and the earth and the seas and all of that. So that's what the Zohar says. The Zohar says that part of the what God created were these days, that they have something sacred to them. Ulakabel inun shiva yomim elayin, and to receive these 7 holy days, says the Zohar in Aramaic, bara shiva zakai kshot. God created 7 true tzaddikim, l'kaim alone, to uphold these days, ulanhar alone, and to illuminate these days, kol chad v'chad v'kabel yomeh, each one in accordance with their day. V'shatil lahu kol chad v'chad b'daradid chazile, and God planted each of these 7 people in a generation that was fit for that person. Inun abhan alma, these are our fathers, our forefathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Yosef, Moshe, Aaron, David. These are the 7 ones we talk about when we talk about the Ushpizim, right? The guests at the Sukkah. But either way, we are talking about Kisheshet Yamim, that God created. There's something about the day that is sacred, not just as a way of marking and passing time. So if Moshe,
so you're saying, whoa. So you're saying that the 6 days were created. That's an actual creation. The days were was a creation also.
Exactly.
And, they're assigning those individuals, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Yosef, and Moshe, and Aaron, to those days.
Exactly. But that's an aside right now. That's an aside. Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, that's an aside. The focus is that God is creating time as a part of creation, not just as a way of marking time or passing time, but time itself is being created as a core element of life. And listen to the interpretation. It's a beautiful interpretation. He says, this is what we all think. The framework and the mindset of the world we live in leads us to imagine that things have actual existence. That I am me, you are you, that this desk I'm sitting at is a desk, that the phone I have next to me is a phone. No, we see an object, ourselves or anything that surrounds us, and we think that it exists. Change, therefore, disturbs us because it disturbs existence. But we dismiss it as secondary, an unavoidable predicament, inconsequential to the existence of a thing. Change, if it has to happen, it'll happen, but it's not the core of existence. Nature dictates that over time a thing changes, becomes old, moves, but the thing itself really is. We perceive all that we see as existing. However, this is simply incorrect. God, the Creator, did not create existing entities. He created processes. When He created this world, He created it in a manner that all things that exist begin in a journey which characterizes their very being. I want to read that last paragraph again for a moment. That this is simply incorrect, that existence reflects something static. The Creator did not create existing entities. God created processes. When God created this world, God created it in a manner that all things that exist begin a journey which characterizes their very being. Meaning, the process of aging, for example, for a human being, is not something that happens to me. It's not that I am separate from my aging. And aging is an external process that is happening to the intrinsic me. But rather, my very existence is an aging journey. Every microsecond of my life, I am aging. At no point do I stop aging and just become me, absent the change that my physical body is undergoing, as it is for every single person. We are all not a static existing thing, but we are all a process. Everything that God created is a process. That's a core of Rav Moshe Shapiro's teachings. Everything is a process, whether you can see it or not, whether you want to see it or not. Everything is a process. Any questions before we have one more jump to go? Maybe one.
I have a question. I'm curious because I have not formally studied philosophy, whether this insight is found in secular philosophy.
You read my mind in terms of the question. I don't have an answer to that. It could be a philosophy 101 answer that I'm just not familiar with. But if anybody else is, or anybody would like to do some work on this, I would certainly welcome that. But I don't have the tools to answer right now. It's a good question.
And also, does this idea of process, does it go against anything in traditional Judaism that anyone would come up and say, hold on, this is a problem, or it's acceptable?
No, it's just a different lens through which we're looking at. There's nothing contentious about this, but it's a different lens. It's a novel idea that he's applying to and now he's bringing back into, we're going to bring back into the 49 and the 50. We're going to bring back into why we're marking a passage of time and where we're going to and what all that represents. So it's a chidush. It's a new idea, a new perspective.
It isn't all that new. It's the concept of everything is in this state of becoming.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, in fact, a part of, let's say, secular philosophy.
But also, like in Judaism, Heschel has this concept of time also, in terms of Jewish philosophy, modern Jewish philosophy.
Right. Absolutely. Excellent.
You can't go against it because it just makes sense that everything is a process.
Right. It makes sense. It sounds, to me, it sounds self-evident once I read it, but I would not, come up with this particular articulation or apply it to the Torah. But you're right. It's but I'm sure there are those who could find a philosophical approach to oppose it. But okay. So Rabbi Shapiro says, additionally, we tend to envision our existence as fixed, and we persistently attempt to preserve its permanence and keep it somewhat constant. We picture the passing of time as some remote calendar whose pages turn, but that is not us. We are here. The Torah reveals that creation is not like this at all. We are the ones whose pages turn. It's not a remote calendar, but rather it's us. We are time, and time is passing. Heaven, earth, sea, and all that is in them include the entire scope of existence. And of them, it says 6 days, not in 6 days, but God made 6 days. God made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. The entirety of existence is the 6 days that God made. The seventh day is the rest that comes at the end. And so we're seeing this model repeated again and again. 6 days and then Shabbat. 49 days and then Shavuot. 49 years and then the Jubilee. There's this idea of the passage of time and then that point of rest and then that destiny that we've been moving towards all along. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, so as we said before in the Zohar, when he said Yesh represents Jubilee and Shemita, he said, what is true existence? And he answers that existence is the sabbaticals and the Jubilee. Sabbaticals are the course and the Jubilee, the destiny. Therefore, true existence is the unity of journey and destiny. The sabbatical years and the Jubilee, journey, sabbatical years, year number 50, the Jubilee, that's the destiny. That's what existence is. And here, I love this part, where he says, okay, now let's talk about Jubilee and destiny. We broke it up into two different letters. A Yud is the Jubilee. A Shin is the destiny. So what is Yud? Yud refers to the Jubilee. So in Hebrew, the Hebrew letter Yud represents turning something that's not in the present, but in future tense. So he gives the example, you can take the Hebrew word shar, which means to sing or sang, into yashir, will sing. The letter Yud, anytime we put the letter Yud, it discusses the future. Appropriately, the letter Yud refers to the Jubilee, the Yovel, the aspired destiny that will arrive in the future. The Shin, so let's do the same thing to the Shin. The Shin expresses an action or a process. When you have the noun liberty in Hebrew, cherut, And the act of liberating is shichrur. So it takes a noun and it gives it, and it activates the noun. The noun slave is eved. The verb to enslave is shiabud. Perfection is kliut. The act of making something perfect is shichlul. And Rav Moshe Shapiro, as we've seen before, has a somewhat tortured relationship with the modern Hebrew language, but he'll even use some modern Hebrew examples. He says modern Hebrew is taking this principle to extremes that are absurd, even repulsive. Kaful, duplicate, becomes shichpul, to duplicate, the act of duplication. When you copy, you have your keys copied. It's called mishachpel, shichpul. Choser, to return, becomes shichzor, becomes the act of restoration. Kniyah, submission, becomes shichnua, the act of convincing, of causing somebody or bringing somebody to a point of submission. The shachnea. So the shin takes a word, so yud takes a word and puts it into the future. You put a yud at the beginning of the word, there you go. The word has drifted off into the future. The shin takes a word, takes a concept, and activates it and makes it into a process. So let's bring this back. Yud is the Jubilee, that's the future. Shin is the Shemita, that's the process. The basis of all these words that the prefix Shin means to perform for a purpose, right? When the beginning focuses on the final destiny, the brilliance of destiny shines forth from the very beginning. Thus, although sabbaticals are the course to reach the Jubilee is considered first, and that is both the true beginning and the final destiny. And with this, the sages teach us the true concept of existence. Only the Creator exists. All else is just creation, and creation is from beginning to end. Thus, the very existence of created beings is a course focused on destiny. God is the only thing that exists. Everything else is a process. Questions before we go to our Act 3, Scene 2? Okay.
Can you
Yeah.
repeat what you said? God is what?
God exists.
Only the Creator exists in the sense of something that is and not undergoing a constant process, says Rav Moshe Shapiro. The rest of us and the rest of existence, anything, a kippah, a book, anything is going through a process. At no point does it simply exist as a fixed point, independent of time.
But doesn't that limit God in that sense? If then we're putting confines.
We are saying that God is destiny, that God is not undergoing, that time does not affect God, that a process that everything goes through is not what God's experience is. Yeah, it is limiting, but I suppose you could look at it from that perspective. Yeah.
Where is he taking his process to? Process to what? Process to life? What?
The process of life, you're saying, where are we all taking our process to? Is that the question?
Yeah, I wonder what is the end of his process? What is our goal in this process?
Our goal is destiny. And he'll point out that destiny is actually where we started. And the goal is closeness to God, and we started close to God, and now we're on a process, and now we're going here, and now we're going there, and we're changing, and we're ever striving. And we have to realize that we're in motion, but we're in motion towards a direction, towards a goal. So I want to talk about Olam Haba. Olam Haba is Menucha, is connected to rest. It's connected to Shabbat. That's where we rest. That's where we've achieved what we need to achieve. This process is Olam Hazeh. And the sources that we're going to end with all speak about this notion of moving. Rabbi Scheier Bar Ashi said in the Talmud in Tractate Brachot, Talmidei Chachamim ein la menucha. They have no rest anywhere. And Rabbi Zera says, Igra da Pirka Riata. The reward for attending the lecture is for running to the lecture. It's the process that brings us there. We are rewarded for the effort that we put in, for the movement, for the motion, because the righteous are always in motion. And as Rashi says, what do you mean igra de pirka? That the reward for the lecture, for studying, ikar kibul sachar habriot, that the essence of receiving reward is habriot ratzim lishma drasha mipni chacham, is where people run to hear a drasha from somebody who is wise. Hischar hamurutza, it's the reward for the running. Because most people don't understand the essence of what's being taught. Most people, for the lecture, they capture a little bit, they capture a lot, and they retain it with them for a long time. When we hear something, when we learn something, does it become a fixed part of who we are? Test me about, and ask me what my class was about last week. And I'm the one who taught it. And I would struggle to ask me 2 weeks ago, no chance. 3 weeks ago, never. Has it become a part of me? Maybe certain parts of it, maybe certain way. But can I stand before God and can I say, and I think it's a beautiful idea. Can I say, you know what, God? I spent 2 years in yeshiva in Israel. Give me a reward for the Torah I studied there. And God would say, okay, tell me the lecture you heard from your Rosh Yeshiva on Tuesday, November 3rd, 19, whatever. I'll say, God, I have no idea. What do you mean? God will say, I'll give you a hint. It's on the topic of, it's on the halachic sugya of sveka, of a double doubt, and how we treat that within halacha. And I say, wow, well, I could tell you a little bit about that topic, but and God says, so you can't tell me anything about the lecture. I gave you a hint. I could tell you who you were sitting next to. I could tell you what you were writing with. I could tell you everything. I could tell you what sources they quoted. And you still can't, but you want reward for it? So, as Rashi in the Talmud says, no, the reward is not for what we learn. The reward is for the process of getting there. It's for running there. It's for the movement that we undertake. Because that's not taken from us. That's lasting. I want to close with a gematria, because
had to close about it.
49 and 50. So just our journey today was showing the parallel of the 49s and the 50s, the 49 days of the Omer, and the 50th day being Shavuot, the 49 years of the sabbaticals, and the 50th year being the Jubilee, and the parallels that also exist within the blessings that are offered for the Omer and for the Jubilee and for the Jubilee year. We showed a new interpretation to that Hebrew word Yesh, the Yud and the Shin, which was Yovel and Shemita, which was the Jubilee and the sabbatical year. We spoke about the concept of creation and how the nuance of the language of the creation, as interpreted by the Zohar, points out that God did not create in 6 days, but 6 days was part and intrinsic to the creation of the heavens and the earth and the sea and all of that. And what that means to have time and to have process as part of our very existence. We went on a little bit of a tangent, which spoke about the Yud and the Shin of the Jubilee and the Shemita, the Yud being the future, being destiny, the Shin being the process of the Shemita, of the sabbatical. And then we spoke about the concept of the movements of what it means to be in motion and to embrace that process and to understand that there's even an aspect of reward to engaging in the process, which doesn't have to do with the learning of the Torah or the retention of the Torah, but it has to do with the process that we undertake to.
Is that right? Is that what you're saying? The Rosh? Is that what you're saying? The Rashi interpreted the reward for the lecture is running.
That's my
interpretation.
Yeah, that's my interpretation of Rashi. It's the effort to get there. It's the process that one took to get there. It's not a literal running, right? I don't think we're talking about the marathon that you took or the sprint that you made, and we should all run to the lecture, run to your computers and open them and turn on Zoom. That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about the effort that one makes. That's where the reward comes. Because if we say the reward is really for what we learned, well, at the end of the day, we're putting in a lot of time. And what stays with us in terms of the Torah? Well, personally, I could say a very small portion of it after time. But it's the process, it's the experience that really that the reward comes for. So the gematria is that we talk about the heavens and the earth, and we talk about from the perspective of us who are sitting here on dry land, the Hebrew, and we embrace this concept of finite. That's what we are. That's what our existence is. Everything here Everything in this physical world, everything that's part of the process is measured, The Hebrew word for a measurement is midah, mem, dalid, hey.
Aha.
Mem is 40, dalid is 4, hey is 5. Measurement is 49. That's the process of things that we can measure of this world. That's the finite experience of our lives, is midah, is 49. Infinite.
Midah connected midah. I don't know.
A measure for a measure. Yeah, that's the phrase. But infinite, the Hebrew word yam. Yud mem is the sea. The sea, ever changing, ever fluctuating, can't be measured. It goes on and on and on from our perspective, standing on land. Yud mem. Yud is 10, mem is 4.
Beautiful.
That's the 50, the 49 and the 50. The midah, the measured, versus the infinite yam, the infinite 50. That's process versus destiny. That's sabbatical, Shemita, achieving the Jubilee. That's counting the Omer to get us to the infinite yam of Torah, the infinite sea of Torah of Shavuot. That's the process that we're undertaking each and every day.
And yet you remembered Safek Svika. And
yet somehow the sugya of sex feka, one of the most complex sugyas, one of the most complex topics in the Talmud. Yes, there's a lot to say about that.
Want to say, there's a beautiful Yiddish play, Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. It's in Yiddish with Haredim, young boys who left the yeshiva, and it's absolutely precious. And they never knew about a play even. And this playwright got them together. And the beauty of it, like she asked one of them to go to a side and just take a look at this monologue. And in 2 minutes, the young man memorized the monologue because that's what they're used to.
That's what they're used to. So I could tell in my first year of studying in yeshiva in Israel, sitting there in the lecture of the Rosh Yeshiva as a newly graduate of Brighton High School, public school in Western New York, with my Hebrew, what it was, and the lecture being delivered in the Hebrew language by an Israeli teacher to a room filled with 80% Israelis, and the other 20% were from all different countries, mostly from the United States, like myself. And many of them had excellent Hebrew education. Some were the children of Israeli parents. And so I sat there and did not understand a word. And I sat next to a dear friend who is the rabbi of a major synagogue in Manhattan today. And we maintained a friendship over the years. And what we would do during this lecture that neither of us were particularly following would be to memorize, that we would sit there and challenge ourselves to memorize the order of all of the books of Tanakh. Give me all of the prophets, all of the scriptures, all of the writings. Today we're going to memorize every tractate, all the 63 tractates of the Talmud in order. So next week we memorized and we prepared for this. We came with our lists. And the next week, we memorized all 39 malacha, all the 39 prohibited labors that one is not allowed to do on Shabbat, the biblical categories of prohibition. And much of this has actually been quite useful for me. Another week, we would memorize. This was before I was a pulpit rabbi, of course, many years before I was a pulpit rabbi, and before we were tuned into the Parasha in a way that in the synagogue life you're very much tuned in. In yeshiva, you're a little bit less tuned into the Parsha. That what the Parsha of the week is less relevant when you're studying Torah all day. But we memorize the order of all of the Parshiot, of all of the entire all the books of the Torah. It was really quite an experience. So I certainly received zero reward for actually following what was happening in those lectures, but hopefully achieved other things as well.
You know, it's interesting. Last night there was a lecture given on, we're talking the 4 parts, there's a 4-part series on Maimonides. And the last thing you just talked about in terms of the reward for a lecture is running, it's movement, it's a process. And he went through various things in terms of Perek HaChelek and whether the reward they talk about one class would be Gan Eden and the opposite Gehenna, and then the Mashimot Mashiach and Tzchiyat HaMeitim, and then good would, you get repose of the body, and the fifth class would be all the previous.
Yeah.
And then he paralleled it to a child in the beginning, you just give a candy, then an older child a trifle, and then, maybe pretty shoes or a coat. And then he said, and then at a higher state, money, and then in the age of discretion that you would become a rabbi or a judge and people will honor you. But he said the aim of one's study should be the truth. It's the process of knowing the truth. So it's kind of like going all the way back to Rambam. We're dealing with concepts that are incredible.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you for that. Okay, we're going to stop the recording now.